this is not you should have a chore chart. You shouldn't have a chore chart. You should have a meal plan. You shouldn't have a meal plan. You should have a budget. You shouldn't have a budget. There are different ways that people handle things. And in every one of those 3 scenarios that I listed out, I do better and I get more things done and I'm more effective when I don't have that. When it comes to after meal cleanup, let's say, there's not you always do this, you always do this, you always do this. It's kind of just everybody doing things until the place is clean. I think that you can do that without it being something very rigid and it still work out. My name is Lisa, mother of 8 and creator of the blog and YouTube channel Farmhouse on Boone. On this podcast, I like to talk about simplifying your life so you can live out your priorities. I help you learn how to cook from scratch and decorate on a budget through this podcast and my courses, Simple Sourdough and the Simple Sewing series. I also help people reach their goals from home through my business course, YouTube Success Academy. I will leave links to these resources in the show notes and description box below. Now let's get into the show. Welcome back to the Simple Farmhouse Life podcast. Today I'm going to be doing a solo episode talking about build updates, mom life, pregnancy, whatever questions you all put into the Google Sheet that we have. You can access that by going to bit.ly/S, capital F, capital L, lowercase questions. It is case sensitive. That's why I spell it out like that. It will also be linked in the show notes or description box below. If you're new to my podcast, I do these chatty style updates because we have a lot going on in our family right now. Once every about 3 weeks. That's how I have been running it for 2025. Might go back to a strict interview only type of show in 2026. We'll see. I know there's probably only so many questions, but they do give me really good prompts for just life updates, mom life stuff that sometimes I don't even think about, the things that you do on a daily basis and maybe how you handle things that you've learned over the years when you are age almost 40 this year, pregnant with our 9th baby, homeschooling, we have all ages of kids. And so there are just things that you pick up over the years. And sometimes you might not even remember that was something that was a struggle or a concern so many years ago. And so I do appreciate the questions because we have listeners from all ages. We have people who ask questions who are well beyond the season that I'm in. And then we have several that are new mothers or somewhere in between that. So it's nice to have this interactive way to communicate with the listeners and get your feedback. It's also a good place for guest suggestions. I have found a lot of guests by this Google Sheet. So you all have put in people that you want to hear on the podcast, and I've been able to bring them on. A lot of them, I will say that when I see them, a lot of them have already been on the podcast. So there's been conversations just in the backlog. We are in, let's see here, this is the 6th year doing this show. So there's just a lot of content that you probably haven't heard. I know when I listen to podcasts, a lot of times I don't like to go back because I like to hear the host in the current season, as far as the world, as far as their life. And so I understand that sometimes you don't necessarily want to go back. But if you want to find someone specifically, search Simple Farmhouse Life and then that person's name, and you might find a conversation that you haven't heard before. And these questions, there is no rhyme or reason on how I take them. I usually look at the most recent questions because I've been looking at this Google Sheet throughout the year, and I try to address the most recent. And some of them have to do with motherhood. Some of them have to do with our new house build or pregnancy. They're just all over the board. Okay, how to manage chores for your kids. Do they have a chore chart or a schedule? How do you share family responsibilities with the kiddos? So I know I've talked about this before, but things change too. You go through seasons where one thing might work and then another season where another thing might work. I always find that part of motherhood and comparing notes with other moms in different seasons really interesting and fascinating because we're trying to all talk about the same thing, right? We're all moms. We're all in different seasons of life. We have different challenges, but we want to share what works. And sometimes I could have 10 years ago got this question and maybe answered it in one way. that would maybe be applicable for someone in that exact situation. And then I might have a whole different answer at a different time. Same person, just different seasons of life. And there's different ways that you handle things based on a lot of factors. So right now, our life feels really busy, mostly because we're building. I mean, like today I was thinking about how every time you have a new baby, when the baby comes into the picture, there's always this, okay, we're up to the next level now. Like what felt hard before, now we're just moving it a little bit further. I remember when Victor was born, I kept calling him level 8. Like when he would cry and I already had a lot of other stuff going on because let's face it, 2 weeks before he was born, life felt very full, very busy with 7 kids. And then when he came, it was level 8. So it was just that much harder. I had all the things I usually needed to do, plus a baby. Well, that's how I feel right now about this house build. I think, how was anything hard before? All I had to do was all of my normal responsibilities, caring for the children, recording a podcast episode once a week, making a YouTube video. There's managing my team, communicating, there's just like the tasks that I have in my office hours. But now I have a house build to think about. And so today, there's a few things I need to measure, a few things I need to order, a few things I need to communicate. And there's something like that just about every day. And I know there's so many of you in various seasons where, like, say you have a child with special needs and people say they complain about something being hard. And you think, imagine if you just didn't have, that other factor to deal with. So there's just always something like that. And by no means is my life the most complicated, but it does feel like an additional thing that when things felt a little maybe stretched before, now we're building a house. And I wonder what I was doing with all my free time before. So with that being said, I never did answer the question. We don't, and we never have had a chore chart for any of the kids. That is just a personality-based thing. And I think it not only is based on your personality and how you want to run your family, but then also the personalities of the children and the husband that are also in that situation. So I think where some families really thrive on that type of structure, other families actually that gets in the way and feels like an extra complicated step. And so it's the same way when it comes to meal planning. Some families, it makes life way harder to not meal plan. Some families, it makes life way harder to meal plan. And we are definitely in we can get healthy meals on the table every day without meal planning. And it's easier than if there's a meal plan. And I know those who meal plan, who have a different type of personality, think that there's no way that's possible. Honestly, I can think of so many analogies here. It's also like budgeting. We've never budgeted. And I say we do Dave Ramsey because we do Dave Ramsey. We don't take on debt. We paid off our mortgage back in whatever year that was. I think it was 2016, something like that. And then we've just done things with cash along the way. And so we do Dave Ramsey in that sense. And I know Dave Ramsey, if he was on this show right now, would tell me I'm absolutely wrong. There's no way you can do that without a budget. And we have, because we've had very limited income, and there's just something intuitive about it to me that doesn't require me to spell out every line and letter. Now, there are people who, if they don't do that, they will end up spending beyond their means. And so this is not you should have a chore chart. You shouldn't have a chore chart. You should have a meal plan. You shouldn't have a meal plan. You should have a budget. You shouldn't have a budget. There are different ways that people handle things. And in every one of those 3 scenarios that I listed out, I do better and I get more things done and I'm more effective when I don't have that. And my family has the same personality. So we are all hands on deck. But when it comes to after meal cleanup, let's say, there's not you always do this, you always do this, you always do this. It's kind of just everybody doing things until the place is clean. And sometimes I might say, hey, you do this. Hey, you do this. But there's no chore chart, but there's also a lot of things to do with a large family. And so I'm not shy about giving out jobs and tasks. And we do have certain children who right now are better suited for certain jobs, and that's usually the ones that we'll give them. So we do share responsibilities. It is all hands on deck. Everybody helps in some way. Of course, the older 4 kids help way more than the younger 4 kids. And that's just the way it's going to be for a while. But I think that you can do that without it being something very rigid and it still work out. I feel like I'm a little out of breath, and I was just getting a baby to bed, up and down the stairs, and then also I'm pregnant. And so excuse me if I am a bit out of breath, but at time of recording, I'm over 30 weeks pregnant. And so, of course, there's all of that in there as well. Okay, on a completely unrelated note, hi, I love your recipes. It seems that whenever I make any sort of dough using my sourdough starter, it's always sticky. For traditional bread, I've used white wheat or white spelt mixed with whole grain. And for other recipes like rolls or cinnamon buns, have used wheat or white spelt. I just tried making your pretzel buns with white spelt. It was very sticky. And now just use wheat and was still a bit sticky. Okay, so first of all, when it comes to any kind of ancient grain, I do recommend weighing the flour when you're replacing it cup for cup because it comes out of the mill very, very fluffy. I did this experiment recently where I freshly milled flour. I took my cup in like I usually do, and then I weighed it, and I got 90 grams, something along those lines. Whereas when I have compacted flour, something that's been in a flour sack, it was shipped to you, it was a white bag of flour, a cup weighs around 140 grams. So when you're freshly milling, especially with a grain that gets really fluffy like einkorn, sometimes spelt, sometimes kamut, depending on the setting on your mill, if you just, for each cup of flour, do 140 grams of milled flour, you shouldn't have that issue as much. I talked about this a ton in my new whole grains course. So I do have a whole grains course that I launched recently where I talk about baking with whole grains and how to substitute things. I think you'll find that very helpful if you are trying to get into baking with whole grains. But just right away, when I see your question, I think maybe you should just do grams. Any recipe, when I try to figure about 140 grams per cup of flour. Now, if you Google how many grams are in a cup of flour, it'll say 120. That's because people are usually doing the spoon and level method. So instead of dunking their cup into the bag of flour, they are lightly putting spoons of flour into the cup. Since I'm not that kind of baker, I go with the 140 grams measurement. Another possible issue is that you need to let the dough sit a lot longer before kneading or doing stretch and folds. When it has time to sit with the liquid, it absorbs it and that gluten starts to develop. So what will look like a dough that's never going to come together, I like to think about brioche. Brioche has butter and eggs, and it's so wet, and milk. And it seems like this will never knead together. And you can take that stuff and you can just start kneading it like crazy, and it will eventually. Or you can let it sit for 30 minutes, even an hour. And then when you need it, it'll happen a lot faster. I'll even just do stretch and folds after that initial process of letting it sit. And the gluten's already stretchy just by sitting there. And so I think, especially with whole grains, having a very long period of time where you don't do anything with the dough, you just mix all the ingredients and then walk away is really helpful. It took me forever to realize how important that was, especially with whole grain. But I bet you, if you mix those up and you measure with grams, you make sure you have enough flour, walk away for an hour, you'll find that it's not sticky anymore. Okay. A pregnancy related question. With you having had quite a few babies, I was wondering if you've ever experienced moderate to severe postpartum depression. How do you balance your hormones after birth? I had a great support group after my baby, but my hormones were wildly out of control for months. Insomnia, temperature swings, severe anxiety, panic attacks, and severe depression. We'd love to have more children. I'm looking for natural ways to set myself up for the best chance next time. That would be really hard. And I could see why you would want to figure that out before becoming pregnant. I don't personally have any experience with that. So I haven't had to figure out what causes that. If I did, I think I'd be like you, trying to seek out some answers to see if we could avoid such a sharp, drastic decline. But I don't personally have any experience. I know there are plenty of moms who do, plenty of people who probably have stories on podcasts or Instagram who could share their experience. So I do hope that you find the answers you need, because that sounds just so hard. I think after birth, there's always that adjustment period where, like you're trying to get back into the swing of things in life. And then you have, like I said, the next level up where maybe what felt already a little stretching before, you now have to push a little further in caring for a newborn. But that's not what you're talking about. That's just normal. Okay, we're adjusting to a new life circumstance versus something that's causing way more in issues and the anxiety. So now that's not to say I don't have anxiety at all. We've definitely had I've talked about this with other moms, like the random things you think when you're a new mom, like, what if I did this, that you worry about? And it's totally irrational. I definitely have had those thoughts pop in my head, but not to where it's debilitating. Usually life feels pretty normal again after about 2 weeks for me, which I know is such a blessing. So far, that's how it's been. I want to take a quick break from this episode to tell you about today's sponsor, Azure Standard. I was a customer of Azure Standard many, many years before this podcast. There was not as many drop locations then as there are now. I remember having to drive pretty far to find one. Well, they have grown quite a bit since, what was that, maybe 2014 when I first started with, I don't know, something like that. But I remember going to that drop location and getting organic dates because I could only get little tiny bags from the store that was near me, raw cheese, bulk grains. Well, Azure Standard still offers all of those things and more, and for a very affordable price. So the way it works is it's basically a co-op model. So you and a bunch of like-minded individuals in your area all go to a drop location. One big truck comes in with your huge order, depending on how big your drop location is, and you get all the boxes off the truck, sort them out, and you have access to things that you probably can't find locally if you're in a rural area. There's no health food store around you. And even if there is a health food store around you, it's probably going to be way too expensive to acquire 50 pounds of wheat berries, one of the things that I like to get. Now, if you like smaller quantities, Azure also offers 5-pound bags of things like whole rye grain, einkorn. You can also get different types of flour, pretty much anything you can think of. Grass-fed butter, there's meat, there's pantry staples, there's fresh produce that has been grown in a quality organic way. All the things that you wish to find for your kitchen, whether you live on a homestead or you live right in town, but you want to have access to food like you would live on a homestead, good quality food you can find at Azure Standard. Now, Azure Standard is offering Simple Farmhouse Life listeners 15% off your first order of $100 or more to a drop location near you with my code SIMPLE15. Head to the Azure Standard website, AUZREstandard.com. Search your location. If you don't have a drop location near you, you can start one. But like I mentioned, since there's been so much more education in the last several years on eating healthy and what that can do for you, and sourcing ingredients that are raised in a way that provide the most nutritional benefit, there's so much education that there's so many people now who are pursuing that. So there's very likely already a drop location near you. I know there are several near me. So again, head to AZUREstandard.com. Use the code SIMPLE15 and see if you can't find some great options for you in your kitchen. We have a Dave Ramsey question. I know you've talked about following Dave Ramsey's advice and being debt-free. I do not want to pry, but curious to see if you could talk about that, especially with your new build. Are you all able to pay for your new build? Or are you financing it? My husband and I just bought a little 20-acre farm, would like to be debt-free, but in today's economy and the price of everything, it just seems overwhelming and honestly a little out of reach. Just seeking any advice or encouragement. So I've been asked this question so many times because earlier in my podcasting YouTube career, I can feel myself going on a tangent here. The internet felt less of a scary place to bear everything. It felt like, well, I had a very small community. So it was all just my friends. I didn't have a whole lot of pushback or negativity. it all felt different than it did. I'd say the internet's become more and more of a negative place to be post 2020, and then increasingly so. As we spend more and more time on our phones, on the internet, I think people have gotten more and more, for lack of a better word, crazy and angry. And so I have become very guarded about the things that I share, which, right or wrong, as my community has grown, I've learned to trust this place a lot less. So if you are somebody I was talking to in real life, I'd probably share every detail about everything when it comes to, like, everybody's asking me so many details about our farm, and I'm just not sharing that many, because once I put information out, I can't take it back. And I have a fresh start with our new place to not overshare, which is a struggle because I share every single week. I sit here for an hour talking, which means I could have the tendency to overshare. And I honestly like sharing. I like sharing stories with other people. I like hearing their experiences, and I like talking to people. So obviously it's hard for me. And so that's my tangent. I do want to also point out that a lot of times we are in very different situations just based on our age and a lot of other factors. So when I first started my YouTube channel back, it was 8 years ago this summer. So that means I was just newly in my 30s, and I had just started my little blog and my YouTube channel, and everything was fresh and new. And it was something that we were building, and we were very excitedly laying the groundwork for everything. And just things were different. Like you mentioned, the economy was different back then. We had 10 less years of working on things and saving. And so through those years, we lived back on Boone Street back then, when I was sharing about, like, we paid off our mortgage and we bought this place with cash. So back then, and we also did hit the timing right. So I know people will say you're so lucky, and in some ways blessed, lucky. We did hit the market. It wasn't anything to do with us. We happened to get married in 2007. So we bought our first house in 2008, which means that we bought it very, very cheap. And I know that kids these days cannot do that. And I also have looked at average incomes of kids these days. And just because the incomes have gone up quite a bit, but the housing prices, I don't think, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I've compared in our area, have not gone up at that same rate. So with what Luke was making, which was a very modest income, the price of our house was about double that, which is crazy now, because if somebody wanted to buy and it depends on where you live, because where I live, you can still actually get really affordable houses. But just looking at real estate across the country, I know that's not true. But even to get double the price, if you were to buy a house that's, say, $300,000, which I think in a lot of areas is almost laughable. There are places where you can still get a nice house for $300,000. I know about these houses. But building, just forget about it. If you wanted to get that house, which would be a very cheap house right now, I think in most places, that would mean that if you were making $150,000 a year, that would be half, which I am not under the impression that most people are making anywhere close to that. So times are different. And it's one of those things where I don't know how to give advice on it, because it's really, there's just not a whole lot anybody can say or do about it. You still have to live within your means. So you still have to make choices based on the income that you are making. I have seen people do very affordable builds with the Schaus model. So somebody in my life that I watched do this, they built a Schaus, which is basically, it's a metal pole barn style building. And a lot of times what people in my area do, because Schauses are extremely common, is they build, let's just say, for example, a 40 by 60 shed house, Schaus, barn dominium, pole barn, however you want to call it, whatever area you live in, you call it something. And then within that building, you put a living quarters. So I have seen people do that on farms that they have purchased in previous economic times very, very inexpensively. Now, if you're going to go buy a farm, build something, and you're still in the earlier parts of your marriage, your career, your life, you didn't have any real estate before that you could sell, because then we also really had great fortune with our second house. So when we sold our first house that we got very inexpensively, we bought a second house in 2019. And if any of you know about what happened in 2020, we bought almost the perfect house that people would want post 2020 because it had a lot of character and charm. It had a little homestead. It was fenced in, and people wanted small farms that they could have some privacy on after that. So, incidentally, after we purchased this place in 2019 for what seemed like a lot of money at that time, is this even a wise decision amount of money at that time, ends up being worth way more when we sell it. And that's just how that worked out. But if you I don't talk to Dave Ramsey, but if you listen to Dave Ramsey, and I do listen to Dave Ramsey, even though I'm not a big budgeter, I really like his advice because he's very practical and he doesn't sugarcoat things, and he doesn't just allow people to wallow, because I think we want to wallow because things have gotten hard. And he still tries to help you figure out how to move forward in the current situation that we're in. Sometimes I think we want people just to say, you know what, you're right. Just give up. Just give up. It's all over with. And he doesn't do that. And so that's actually helpful advice, even though sometimes it comes off a little bit like he's missing the moment that we are in. But I think that it's the most helpful thing, because we're not going to be able to just change the amount of inflation that's happened in the last several years and make it not so. And so to work within those parameters, even if they are different than what they were, is what's going to be required of people. So with that being said, I do recognize and acknowledge that it's harder right now if you didn't purchase real estate back when we purchased real estate. I do think it's always seems too expensive. And my dad told me this when we were looking at property, because we were looking at property to purchase, to build on around 22, 23, and everything looked too expensive. Like, I just cannot believe the ground here is going for that. And already looking back at those prices 2 years ago, 1 year ago, even 5 years ago, oh my word, post-COVID, when everybody thought, this is crazy, this is a bubble, it's gonna crash, it's gonna pop, it's gonna go way down from here. No, everything only went up, up, up. At least I can only speak for my area. And so I think it is wise, even though it always seems too expensive to buy a place, if you thought it was too expensive 2 years ago, you would now be better off had you purchased something 2 years ago. And of course, we can't predict the future, but if you can get in some capacity, just looking at the past, it seems like it was almost always a good idea at some point to get in it. Because I even think about the house that we purchased in 2008. What it had sold for previously, before the big crash, before the big 2008 meltdown of mortgages and some subprime mortgage crisis, all this stuff, what the previous owners paid for it seemed crazy to me. I can just share. So the previous owners before, because I think I already shared this online, so I'm not giving any new information. Prior to what we bought it for in 2008, the previous owners had purchased it for $120,000, and they were foreclosed on it. And then we, because some real estate agent bought it, I don't even think he fixed anything up, but he just relisted it. And then we were able to buy it for I don't know if I should, $76,000, I'll just say it. And because of that, when I looked back and saw the real estate history on it, I was like, I cannot believe somebody would pay $120,000 for this. That's just crazy. But then you look at when we sold it a decade later, if that previous person, which I realized they had circumstances that they couldn't pay for because it was foreclosed on. But it eventually caught back up and then some. And then if you were able to sell it now, it would be like, we shouldn't have even sold it when we did. If we could look at the future, we should have kept it and sold it now because it would have paid us way more than that. But everything always seems high no matter what. And then over time, it goes up. That's not always the case. And I know there's going to be some economics people who are like, that's not always true. But if you look at the last, at least since I've been watching real estate, which is probably the last 20 years because I'm 40 and I wasn't interested prior to 20 years ago, or almost 40. If you look at that, there's really not many times where it wasn't a good idea to buy a house or a property as long as you were able to hold on to it and eventually make a profit out of that. So, that was long-winded. But with all that being said, I understand what I can see that it would be very hard right now to be a brand new 20-something, making the income that 20-somethings make, having no previous real estate to sell, having yourself not in the market. I can see the challenges there. I was at a homesteading convention in late June. There was the Modern Homesteading Convention, and I was on a Q&A panel with Daniel Salatin, which is Joel Salatin's son, Will Harris, a bunch of people. It was great. And somebody actually asked this question, a young person in the audience, because this is the question that's on everybody's mind. And honestly, I never even know how to answer it. And that's why I'm just babbling on forever, because you almost have like a sense of guilt because, as a person who's a little bit older, we did make some wise decisions. We did buy property and we held on to it, but I don't even know if that's a possibility in it right now. But anyway, somebody asked, what do? I think she said she was 22. She wanted to farm and she was living in Idaho. And so up there, the real estate just went nuts because people were coming in droves from California to kind of escape the political situation and put down some roots just a little bit east there in Idaho. And so they had a situation where their real estate blew up. And honestly, Missouri is the same way. The prices just keep going up because there are a lot of people who are seeking those larger parcels of land. And there's a lot of places where you can't get them, but then there's very rural areas where you still can. And she wanted to know how she was going to be a homesteader when there was really nothing she could afford. And they encouraged her that to get started, at least with homesteading, you don't have to own the land. You can really, if you do a great job, find somebody in your area who doesn't need the land, but they need somebody to help manage it. And they might really, like if you take good care of the land, they would potentially allow you to use it for you to take care of it, but then also for you to produce something off of it. They had a lot of great advice. And if you're interested in buying the tapes or I don't call them tapes, but the recording from the Modern Homesteading Convention, I also did a fermenting class and a sourdough class. And there was great talks by so many great speakers. I believe that you can. But in a sense, you don't necessarily have to have land that you own to live this lifestyle. If you can get into the market in some small way and in the same American dream kind of way that Luke and I pursued, where you buy something really small and then you sell it 10 years later, take that money, buy something a little bit bigger, a little bit more in line with what you want, park it there for, we did 6 years, but a decade, whatever it might take, and then move up. That's kind of the way it works. And I think that it can still work in that way. It's just the steps might be a little less gradual than that. I've had people say to me, aren't you sad that your older kids won't live in their childhood home? And I realized that this was being able to live on a farm and build a house was not something that we could afford when our oldest was little. And I think that's really common for a lot of people. It's the same reason that my parents also don't live in my childhood home, but they have a beautiful home and a beautiful property for the grandkids to come to. And I'm really glad they do, because there's so much to do there. There's a creek. We can kayak. We can jump in a swimming hole. There's side-by-sides, and there's just, it's fun. But it did take all those years. They didn't buy that place till they were in their 40s. And so it's just a process. And I think I would recommend listening to Dave Ramsey and his advice on it all, because he's really into real estate and he's very smart about it. There are more than one way to do real estate. There are people who make it huge by leveraging themselves. Like, if you could go back in time, and hindsight, as they say, is 2020. So if you could know what's going to happen, and even me, if I could, even though I like the simple living of not having to owe anybody anything, knowing, okay, if something happens to this part of the income, sure, that wouldn't be fun, but we'd still make it. But if I had a time machine, of course, there's a guarantee here. And back in 2007, when we first got married, I could see the future. The smart thing to do, who I've done, would have been to take out as much debt as you possibly could in '08, buy everything up, hold on to it all the way until 2024. I think that's probably I don't know. I feel like things are down just ever so slightly, but not really. And then sell it all. And then, you'd have this great fortune. And honestly, I don't even think they would have given us much more than we even got in debt. Like, I don't think we could have gotten more. But if at some point when we had a few extra resources, like when we bought our middle property, the one that we lived in before, if we would have bought that instead of buying it with cash, like we were very excited to do, because we could continue pursuing our ideals, our values, our morals. But it would have been smarter financially. We would be more money ahead had we not sold it. We just would have kept that house on Boone Street, use it as a rental, taken out a mortgage instead of selling it, taking that cash and a little bit of cash that we saved, buying the next place, taking out a mortgage to buy the property in between, renting that one out. We'd be money ahead right now. But I appreciate that Dave Ramsey, when he talks to his listeners, he isn't all about making the most money possible, because you could absolutely leverage debt and become very, very wealthy. But there's a piece that we seek that's a scary several years to live in when you don't see the future. You don't see the future. You don't know what's going to happen. You're leveraged to the max. And if it doesn't work out how you hope, all those debtors could come calling at the same time, which is what happened to Dave earlier in his career. And he had to go bankrupt. So there's more than one way to do it. There are a lot of very wealthy people who utilize debt in a very successful way. And I'm not going to deny that that's very possible and that they actually make that work. But I do appreciate that Dave Ramsey takes into consideration the peace that you get when you don't owe anybody anything. And we found that back when we first paid off our mortgage back in it was like 5 years in. So 13? Yeah, I didn't do my math right. Probably it was like 2013. So there hasn't been a mortgage since then. And we have no plans to make a change on that. But he also does encourage young people to get in the market, and mortgages are his acceptable debt. Now, he has rules for mortgages. I think you should pay 20% down. And then you need to have a 15-year mortgage that isn't more than 50%. I could have that totally wrong of your take-home pay. I could have that part wrong. I know it has to do with putting 20% down and having a 15-year mortgage and being able to afford that 15-year mortgage without having to stress yourself out to the max and being house poor. I know it has something to do with that. I don't have it memorized, but if you go listen to Dave Ramsey, he will teach you the acceptable amount that you can do. And he always encourages young people to get into the market for all the reasons I just spoke about, that it always seems too expensive. Ground seems too expensive. Homes, building costs, they always seem too much until you look at them 5 years later and you're like, well, that would have been great. So I remember somebody close to me wanted to build 5 years ago, and they went to get the price estimate on a certain plan. And we were just flabbergasted. We could not believe that's what it was going to cost to build a house in, 2020, 2021. And if you could accept that deal right now, you would be getting the biggest deal of your life. And that was only 5 years ago. So I think it is wise to responsibly get into the market. So I don't talk about financial stuff much, mostly because, like I said, the internet's a crazy, scary place. Lots of people disagree with you. Lots of people are hurt by a lot of the current things that are happening. And so they want something to blame for why they can't do things. And so it's hard for me to both acknowledge that that's true, but then also give practical advice on how to move forward given that certain situation. When Luke and I were first married 17 years ago, we were on a super tight budget, and the only way that I could decorate my home and make it my own cozy space was by doing a lot of DIY and sewing. I've shared that for years on my YouTube channel, on this podcast, on my blog, and recently I put all of those resources together, all of the patterns, the tutorials, and then step-by-step instructions from getting a machine and threading it, learning about tension issues and the bobbin, all those things maybe over the years that have scared you away from sewing, into one course that I've called the Simple Sewing Series. If you've wanted to sew but have been intimidated by the process of getting started, or even if you're a more seasoned seamstress or sewist and you want to improve your skills, I really think that this will be a great resource for you. There's also a private community associated with it, so if you have sewing questions or you're excited to meet other people who are also getting started on their sewing journey, that's available with the course as well, and it's for a very affordable price. You can find my new course and all of the resources that go along with it over at bit.ly/simple sewing course. That's bit.ly/simple sewing course, all lowercase. That's where you can find more info and become a student. Hi, Lisa. I've listened to all your content for years, and I can't say enough how much I appreciate you. I feel like you're my big sis, and I've learned so much from you. I was watching you organize your front closet in a recent YouTube video, and I just watched your house build tour. I love your house build. I do notice there doesn't seem to be much space in the mudroom or entrance hall for all the shoes, winter clothes, swim items, socks, etc. Also, your game boards and all your books. Will there be a spot to do homeschool and to keep your homeschool supplies? Since you are still in the building process, I just want to share my observations in case you find it helpful, since you can still make changes. First off, I do want to say, and I've had this thought for basically every time I share anything about the build in the YouTube comments, and I love interacting with you all. Sometimes, though, I do find the amount of feedback very tiring. It is, because I've opened myself up to hundreds of thousands of people. So guess what I get? Just like I would do if I was watching something. I want to give my, I get it. But one thing I do want to say is I don't think anybody could have overthought this design more than myself. I've gone nuts. I've driven myself nuts thinking about all this stuff. So I do realize, and something I've learned with building is before you design a house, you kind of think you can have everything you want. If you're building a house from scratch, then if you want this, 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 and this, you can get all of those things in one house. And then when you actually practically start doing it, you realize that, oh, this idea doesn't go with this idea. And you see why there are compromises made on every single house build. And the way that our house is structured with the central hall, because I'm trying to go for a historic look, means that there's halls in the front and the back, and there's really only one way to divide it. And unfortunately, we are in the middle of the building process, the design, and I don't know if this is unfortunate or not, probably for my sanity, this is not unfortunate. This is very fortunate. The design really can't be changed at this point. Yes, we could add an extra shelf in the closet in the mudroom, but the way it's framed is just done because all the windows, all the materials, it's all ordered and it's all happening. But I do believe it can work. I understand the concern. And this is going to be like the most tangent episode known to man. One of the biggest pieces of advice I got when I shared our new house walkthrough, all framed up, was that I should get 2 washers and dryers. And everybody, I think a lot of this comes from people who don't have a large family and who imagine what it might be like to have so many people in a family. And you think, well, if I were to have a large family, I would want this. And I've given way too much thought to the whole double washer dryer thing. And I have to be honest with you all, and you can let me know in the comments if you agree. I cannot understand it. I don't see how it would help. And I'm open to the explanation, but for us, there's never a moment where the problem with laundry is that it can't be washed and dried fast enough. It's always on the other end, the actual putting it away. And I think that's for most families. It's not that if you just, because are people who have two washers and dryers, are you keeping both of those going all day long? Because to me, I would rather, again, you could explain this to me because I genuinely am trying to figure it out. I asked my husband, I was like, do you think it would help to have two washers and dryers? And he agreed it wouldn't. And then I asked my sister, because she has a large family, do you think your life would be easier if you had two washers and dryers? And she was like, I don't see why that'd be easier, because it's never that there's a pile sitting there waiting to be washed and dried. It's always that once it's done all of its work, because all you have to do is throw it in, press the button, throw it in, press the button. Then you have to put it away. That's the part that you have to do. The washer and the dryer, they do their work. And then you're up. You've got to put the stuff away. So for me, that's where I found the bottleneck. And the way to solve that in my case is I keep most of the clothes in the laundry room. We actually even redid it a little bit, because before I kept the three little boys in there with a dresser. It's a very small laundry room, but we have a dresser where we have the three little boys' clothes in there. Well, I added two more baskets in our very small laundry room for two more kids. So now I have a basket for the girls. They take that. That's easy enough. And then I have a basket for me and Luke. And then one other son goes in there. And then I have 5 kids' laundry in there, because the bottleneck is that part. And so if I can sit there and right in the laundry room, put all those clothes, just throw them in all of the 5 baskets for those kids. And then they never go to their room for clothes. They go there. So the dirty clothes come off straight into the washer. New clothes go on. And then it goes washer, dryer in those baskets. That to me is the bottleneck. Maybe there are families where the bottleneck is happening prior to that, and there's piles sitting there waiting to be washed and dried and not enough capacity in the washer and dryer to move it through to have the bottleneck on the other end. So I'm curious, is that the case? Because that's never our problem. We never have a pile sitting there because I keep the washer and dryer going, usually twice a day. Something goes in the washer, something goes in the dryer, usually at least 2 loads a day. And so I don't get it. And then I also had a lot of people who said that we should have 2 dishwashers. And there again, capacity is never the problem, because I think that in order to have the dishes actually be clean, you should run the dishwasher after every single meal. And usually it's not quite full after every single meal. And so maybe just putting the appliances you have to harder use and making them actually work throughout the day, to me, would eliminate the need for double. All that being said, that's just a thing I've been thinking about. I've been thinking about that a lot. And I had to get off my chest, because there's no less than 50 people that told me that my life would be so much easier if I had 2 washers and dryers. And I'm trying to figure it out, because we could in the laundry room put 2 stackable units so that you had washer, dryer, however it goes. Maybe it's washer, dryer. So we could. I just can't see how it would help, especially because to me, since the bottleneck is the other part, if I could put a shelf above the washer dryer so there wasn't a stackable unit, then I would have 3 more baskets to store 3 more kids' clothes in a really tight space and solve that part, that little kink in the system. With that being said, with the mudroom, that's what you asked about. It is a small mudroom, but we have 9-foot 6-inch ceilings. And if I have floor to ceiling storage, which I had in my last house, I actually have double the space that I had in the last house for built-ins. So in our last house, I had floor to ceiling cabinetry, just one small run. I believe there was 4 doors total in the middle, 4 at the top, small, 4 at the bottom with pull-out shoe drawers. And we kept all of our family stuff just in that one spot. Even though we had a large mudroom, we didn't have any more space in that mudroom for built-ins because of the way it was structured. So with this one, though it's small, there are 2 places on either side where you can have floor to ceiling cabinetry. And also, I try to stay very minimal with things, because when you have more space for something like coats, shoes, swimwear, what happens is you put more stuff in there, and then you have to keep that space tidy, when in such a hardworking space, that's actually really difficult. So even though it's a bit of a job twice a year to put away the swim stuff or to put away the snow stuff, I don't keep both in rotation. I put one somewhere else. So right off that mudroom, we do have a closet that is under the stairs because the front stairs go like this. You got your mudroom, you got that closet. So that's where I would probably keep the off-season stuff so that while we are accessing our summer things, we aren't getting into winter things and kids aren't pulling out coats in the middle of the season and then vice versa. So to me, I think that will actually be easier. I'm not even sure I'd want a larger mudroom if I could. That being said, it could be that after we get all those cabinets in there, I might find that, oh, there's less space than I thought. And, in that case, there's a lot of little nooks and crannies throughout our new house that I could keep things. It doesn't have to all be accessible at all times because in the winter, that's when we need winter boots, winter coats, and then those will go away. And I prefer not to keep winter boots mixed in with summer sandals all in the same place because even if there's space, that just makes everything very inefficient. The other question was about the games. So we have this great little closet, and before you go up the attic stairs, actually it's behind the attic stairs, there's a large closet. It's short. It's only 5 feet tall. So I had to find the right doors for that. But it's a very wide closet and we plan to be efficient with shelving in there. And I think that's where we'll keep games. I like that they'll be a little less out of the rotation because I like a more intentional game time as opposed to younger kids who are like, let's get all this stuff out when it's in the main living space, which is what we've had actually currently. That's how we have it. And it's a disaster. And I need to get rid of some games because we just cannot keep that many straight. And we don't end up even playing that many games. For the times that we would play a game, one could go to a designated game closet that wasn't in the main living space and get out a game. So all this to say, I think that you figure out how to use a house based on the house. Like when we were living at Boone Street, things were different. They were organized in a different way than when we lived at our last farmhouse, and then way different than when we live at this house, simply because of how the layout is. And you always figure out how to efficiently utilize the space. We are building the biggest house we've ever lived in. It's not a mansion, but it's plenty of space. And there are so many nooks and crannies that I know, even if it's different from how it is right now, that I will find an efficient use of all of that space and we'll be able to fit everything in. You asked about school, and actually Luke and I were talking about this just last night. It was the night before. We were at the build and we met with the electrician and we figured out where every light and outlet goes, which is crazy overwhelming task, but it's done. So that's cool. Might be wrong, but it's done, which is, you live with decisions you make. But we are standing in the sunroom and we both love the sunroom. The chimney is framed up in there now. And so you can picture where the back of the brick will be. There's windows all around it and the views. This is why we bought the farm we bought. The views are incredible. When we have cattle on those pastures, it's just going to be great. So we imagine that a lot of the school will happen in that room. We've never been homeschool room type people because I just know that if there was a designated room for homeschool, but it wasn't in a convenient area, i.e. Close to the kitchen, one where there's plenty of natural light, it's beautiful. Like I couldn't imagine stashing like homeschool down in the basement or something because that's not where we live. Mom needs to usually go back and forth from making breakfast to helping with math to maybe swapping out a load of laundry because she doesn't have 2 washers and dryers. And so she can't do that. She got to do that throughout the day. Maybe that's the reason, because then you can just do it one time and you have 2 loads. Okay. But it's right off the kitchen. So I'm just always there. Anyways, it needs to be integrated with life. And we don't have it as much as this thing where we lock ourselves in for 8 hours a day and we don't see the light of day until school's over. It's very integrated with life. And so I think that sunroom, because it's off the kitchen, so it's not taking up the kitchen table, which is going to be excellent, it will likely live in there. So it's very close to the main action, yet also you could keep some books sprawled out and it'd be okay. With that, we're probably going to need to put some kind of bookshelf in there because there's a lot of windows. It'll be a bookshelf that's low down. I do not like keeping all the books in the main living space. I learned that because in our current house, we have floor to ceiling bookshelves in one entire room, which is amazing. I know there are a lot of people who are like, are you kidding me? I would just die to have that. So it's just too messy and cluttered for me. I do not like it because we have a lot of hands reaching for a lot of books. And so they do not get all put back pretty like a Pinterest picture. They're facing every which way. Sometimes they're this way. They're not like lined up. Their spines are not out. And so that's not for me. So likely what we would do is have maybe in the basement, maybe in the attic, some kind of space, some kind of bookshelf area way out of the main living space where we keep everything. And then what you are currently working on that semester, taking those 10, 15 books, whatever they might be, putting them in a small bookshelf there in that sunroom, and then just addressing it, pulling from the library, and then living in that room and keeping all the things you're currently working on. For us is more efficient because what also happens is you have certain books that you are working on and they get thrown in the bookshelf in a weird space and you can't find what you're working on because they're all mixed in with all the rest of the books. I really do think it is a more efficient thing to only keep in rotation in the main living space, whether it's the mudroom with seasonal items, whether it's the homeschool room with seasonal homeschool items, what you are currently using, because then you see it, you grab it, and there's not a lot cluttering that up. Whew, I think I took like 30 minutes per question today. I will take one more, and I guess I'm feeling extra chatty today. Ooh, this is a fun and fast one. What are 3 sourdough items you are making on repeat during this season? So it's currently summer, and this does change from season to season, but sourdough bagels, I've talked about this like a million times on my YouTube channel because I like that I can make them in bulk, slice them in half after baking them, put them in a freezer bag, and then people can go grab them out of the freezer and put them in the toaster, break them in half, put them in the toaster anytime. Bread. So I do my no knead recipe, but I do half whole grain, half all purpose. And that's just our staple bread right now. And then the third would be hamburger buns because summer sandwiches. I'm not making that near as much as I'm making the other 2, but pretty often during the summer. Okay. Well, that took a lot of tangents. I hope I didn't offend too many of you. And I hope that I at least gave you some encouragement and filled you in on some of the things going through my brain as far as building and designing a house. I know a lot of you aren't in that season, and maybe you never will be. If I would have listened to this 10 years ago, I would have thought for sure that I never would have been. But things just change all the time. We say things like, I would never, this would never be me. And then life situations just change. And that's why I don't like to say forever home, because I'm saying this all confidently now, like we'll live here forever right now at age 39. And what is 60-year-old me doing? I have literally no idea. So, we'll just hold that loosely, but I do as currently think we're probably building that. But yeah, I like taking you all along with me and sharing what's going on with all of that. And you all have a lot of curiosity and questions. So it's been a fun process to take part in on the internet. If you have any questions that you could add to this list, again, bit.ly/S, questions, Simple Farmhouse Life questions. We'll also leave that link below. As always, thank you so much for listening. I'll see you in the next episode of the Simple Farmhouse Life podcast. Thanks, as always, for listening to the Simple Farmhouse Life podcast. My husband, Luke, and I and our 8 kids work together side by side on our little homestead and use our blog, podcast, and YouTube channel to reach other homemakers, home cooks, and homesteaders with practical recipes and daily family life. For everyday sourdough recipes, make sure to check out our blog, farmhousehomeboon.com. And to dig deeper, we do also offer a course called Simple Sourdough over at bit.ly/farmhouse sourdough course. That's all one word, bit.ly/farmhouse sourdough course. If you're looking to learn how we earn an income online, check out my YouTube course at bit.ly/farmhouse YouTube course, all one word.